I always thought my life was normal. Not perfect, not extraordinary, but steady, predictable, and comfortable in the way only family can make you feel. Growing up, my parents were the kind who celebrated birthdays quietly but meaningfully, who showed love in gestures rather than grand speeches. I remember mornings with the smell of my mom's coffee filling the kitchen and the sound of my dad's old jazz records humming in the living room. My sister and I weren't always close, but there was a rhythm to our relationship, a blend of teasing, shared secrets, and occasional silent competitions that never felt too serious. I used to line up our old toys in the attic and imagine worlds where we were explorers together, and for a little while, everything felt balanced. There were moments, small ones, that hinted at subtle favoritism. My sister getting slightly brighter praise for a painting at school, my parents' eyes lingering longer on her at recital night. But I shrugged them off. I told myself families had their quirks. I told myself I wasn't entitled to measure love and fairness. And yet, in the back of my mind, I carried this quiet expectation that our bond, our sacrifices, our shared years would be recognized in some way when the time came. I walked through the house recently, looking at the family photos lining the hallway, smiling faces frozen in time. There's my dad in a sweater too big for him, holding a tiny me who was probably asking for breakfast. There's my sister, arms crossed and mischievous grin, already plotting some mischief at age 6. Each photo whispered memories I clung to. The comfort of bedtime stories, the smell of rain on our backyard after a summer storm, the warmth of a hand on my shoulder when life felt too big to handle alone. It was a life that felt fair. I thought. I understood the rules. Love was constant, respect was mutual, and one day, when the world got complicated, my family would have my back. I didn't know then how fragile that illusion could be. It started with tiny moments that barely registered at first, like the faintest cracks in a wall I thought was solid. A compliment given a little louder to my sister, a thank you that lingered longer when she did something for my parents. I remember the day I helped Mom set up her garden, kneeling in the damp soil for hours, my hands raw from the work, only for her to gush over my sister's natural touch, as if I hadn't even been there. I laughed it off at the time, muttering to myself that maybe she just liked the flowers my sister planted better, that it wasn't personal. But then there were the quiet moments, the way my dad's eyes would light up when my sister talked about her day, the small rewards for achievements I thought were equal, the birthday gifts that seemed more thoughtful for her, even when I tried not to notice. I found myself replaying memories, helping with school projects, staying up late to finish chores, quietly supporting the family in ways that went unseen, yet I never received that same attention. And still, I told myself I was overthinking. Families have favorites sometimes, right? It didn't matter. Except that it started to matter. The small seeds of doubt took root slowly, in flashes, like the time I watched my sister unwrap a gift I had painstakingly picked out, and my parents' faces lit up with pride that somehow didn't reach me. I began noticing patterns I hadn't allowed myself to see before, those tiny hints of imbalance that whispered a quiet, uncomfortable truth. Maybe, just maybe, my place in the family wasn't as secure as I thought. It was subtle, almost invisible to everyone else, but to me, it settled in the pit of my stomach, a cold, creeping uncertainty. I tried to push it away, to tell myself love isn't measured in comparisons, but deep down, the doubt lingered like a shadow at the edge of a bright room. Every smile, every word of praise from my sister chipped at my sense of belonging, leaving me to wonder if all the effort, all the care I'd given over the years had meant less than I ever realized. I'll never forget the day it happened. The day the ground beneath me seemed to vanish. My parents called me into the living room, that familiar space filled with worn couches and the faint scent of lavender from Mom's diffuser. I thought it was a casual chat, maybe about the garden, or plans for the holidays. Instead, their words hit me like a sudden storm. "We've decided to give your sister the entire inheritance," my dad said, calm and certain, as if he were reading the weather report instead of dismantling my entire world. I blinked, trying to register the sound. Did I hear that right? My heart pounded in my chest, the room tilting ever so slightly, though I knew it was just me spinning in disbelief. My hands, resting on the arm of the sofa, felt strangely cold, almost foreign. Mom's eyes were soft, But there was no hesitation, no room for argument. Only the quiet finality that made the words sting even more. I tried to form sentences, questions, protests, but nothing came out. A voice inside me screamed, "This isn't fair. This isn't how it's supposed to be." I glanced at my sister, sitting a little too comfortably on the armchair across from me, her smile wide but nervous, probably sensing the tension. I wanted to ask, to shout, to collapse, all at once. Instead, I sat there, frozen, the room filling with the sounds of normalcy around me. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint rustle of a page turning in a magazine. And yet, in that moment, everything felt suffocatingly loud. Flashbacks crashed through my mind. Every late night I spent helping with her school projects. Every holiday I sacrificed to work overtime and make ends meet. Every word of advice I gave that went unnoticed. I realized then that those years of effort, of silent devotion, were invisible in the face of my parents' decision. Humiliation wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. I wanted to vanish, to crawl into a corner where no one could see the shock, and hurt carved across my face. And yet, the family sat there, expecting me to react with grace, with understanding, with acceptance. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not when the foundation of my world had just been shaken. The days that followed felt like I was living underwater, everything muffled, slow, and heavy. Every interaction with my family carried an invisible weight, a reminder that I had been overlooked, disregarded, and, worse, humiliated. Dinner conversations felt like a minefield. My parents' laughter at my sister's stories echoed around me, bouncing off walls that once felt safe. I caught myself forcing smiles, nodding along, while my stomach twisted with a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. I remembered the countless times I had tried to contribute, to support, to be present, and yet here I was, the silent outsider in my own home. Flashbacks assaulted me in the quiet moments. Mom praising my sister's report card, Dad raving about her work at a family gathering, their faces alight with pride I had never seen aimed at me. I wanted to scream, to point out every effort I had ever made, but the words lodged themselves in my throat. The humiliation was sharp and personal, gnawing at my sense of self. Walking past my childhood bedroom, I lingered on the shelves where I once proudly displayed trophies and awards, now gathering dust, ignored just like me. The house that once felt warm now seemed too big, too empty, filled only with the echoes of favoritism. Even outside, the world seemed brighter for everyone else. It was as if a spotlight followed my sister wherever she went, while I stumbled in the shadows, unnoticed. My thoughts circled endlessly, sarcastic and bitter. Congratulations, you get it all. And me? I get nothing. Except this exquisite, soul-crushing embarrassment. Sleep became another battlefield. I woke in the middle of the night replaying the announcement, the subtle glances, the words unspoken, feeling smaller with each iteration. I wanted to lash out, to confront them, but fear of being dismissed, of being seen as ungrateful, held me back. And so I carried it silently, a heavy stone in my chest, moving through familiar rooms that no longer felt familiar, haunted by the reality that the family I thought I knew could humiliate me so effortlessly, and maybe, just maybe, they didn't even see it. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the world seemed to pause, memories came flooding back like a relentless tide, uninvited but impossible to ignore. I thought about all the times I had poured myself into my family without expecting recognition, staying up until dawn to help my sister with her school projects while I juggled work and my own studies, spending weekends fixing the leaky faucet or painting the fence while my friends were out enjoying life, quietly covering bills and expenses that no one thanked me for. I remembered the sacrifices, the small and large, that no one seemed to notice, missing my own milestones to attend family events, holding back my own dreams to support theirs, giving advice that was quietly accepted but never acknowledged. And now, in hindsight, those efforts felt like ghosts haunting me, reminders of everything I had done in service to people who would, without hesitation, overlook me when it mattered most. Flashbacks hit hardest during simple moments, like walking past the old piano where I had spent hours teaching my sister her favorite songs, or seeing the scrapbook of achievements I had helped compile for her school presentations. I had loved my family fiercely, sometimes too much, and now that love felt like it had been a transaction I didn't know I was making. Effort for approval, devotion for recognition. The cruelest part wasn't just the inheritance being handed away. It was realizing that my presence, my labor, my loyalty had gone invisible. My parents, the ones I trusted implicitly, had weighed my contributions and deemed them less worthy, giving all of it to someone else. The memory of my sacrifices twisted inside me, leaving a bitter taste that mingled with a deep sadness. I couldn't tell whether I felt more anger or sorrow. Both were intertwined, like roots of a tree too deep to separate. I sank into the couch, staring at the ceiling, thinking of all the moments I had given myself away quietly, without complaint, only to have my existence in their eyes shrink to nothing more than a footnote. That's when the reality hit hardest. I had invested my heart and time into a family that now seemed unable to value me, and it hurt more than I could have imagined. I couldn't escape the arguments I kept having inside my own head, the endless loop of should I say something? Should I walk away? Am I overreacting? Every time I tried to organize my thoughts, the questions multiplied, stabbing at me from every angle. I imagined confronting my parents, rehearsing sharp words in my mind, each one dripping with sarcasm and hurt, only to end up in a pit of self-doubt. Moments later, "You're being dramatic," one voice whispered. "They probably didn't mean it that way," said another. But the ache in my chest told me differently. I realized the battle wasn't with them anymore. It was with myself, with my own expectations of fairness, love, and acknowledgement. My thoughts tumbled into memories, flashes of moments I had silently sacrificed for the family's comfort. Making sure my sister had the perfect birthday cake, staying late to help mom with her taxes, cheering at every recital like my own heart depended on it. And yet, the weight of their decision made those acts feel invisible. I paced the empty hallway, my hands brushing against the wall as if seeking some stability, but there was none to be found. Every shadow seemed to mock me, reminding me that the person I thought I was, the reliable, dedicated, loyal child, was now someone ignored and underestimated. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, sharp and bitter, but it was tangled with despair and exhaustion. I imagined conversations that would never happen, the words I wished I could scream, the questions I wanted to demand answers for, the sarcastic quips that would expose my parents' disregard. Yet, each time I opened my mouth in my mind, the words faltered and silence returned, heavier than any insult. I realized then that confrontation wasn't just about pointing fingers or voicing frustration. It was about facing the painful truth that love and effort don't always guarantee recognition. And in that quiet, suffocating moment, I understood something essential. I had to reckon with my own feelings first, or I would be swallowed entirely by the hurt and humiliation. After weeks of silent simmering, I finally reached a point where I couldn't stay invisible any longer. I tried, quietly at first, to speak up, to assert myself, to claim even a fraction of the respect I felt I deserved. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the smell of dinner half-cooked and steaming. Around me, my hands clenched so tightly I could feel the tension in my knuckles. I tried to voice my feelings calmly, explaining how the inheritance announcement had hurt me, how all my efforts over the years felt dismissed. But the words were met with a polite nod, a quick change of subject, or, worse, a gentle reminder. That we love you, of course. The dismissals cut deeper than any anger ever could. My sister, seated across from me, gave a tentative smile, as if she were caught between empathy and her own giddy relief, and I felt a sudden surge of isolation so sharp it took my breath away. I tested the limits further in small ways, pointing out the hours I had devoted to family tasks, the sacrifices I had made, but each mention was shrugged off or overshadowed by the familiar phrase, "It's just how things are." I felt my patience fray, a cocktail of frustration, sadness, and disbelief twisting inside me. I realized that no matter how carefully I tried to assert myself, my parents' perception of me had been cemented long ago, and their love, while present, didn't translate into acknowledgement or fairness. My inner monologue grew sharper, even sarcastic. "Oh yes, I see now, years of silent devotion, and I get a standing ovation in my own imagination. Bravo me." By the end of that evening, I was drained, yet oddly determined. The confrontation hadn't gone the way I wanted, but it had clarified something crucial. I couldn't rely on their validation anymore. If I wanted respect, if I wanted to feel seen, I had to find it outside their approval. And though the pain lingered, there was a small, simmering ember of resolve that began to flicker inside me. A realization that maybe the limits I was testing weren't theirs too. Define it all. I reached the breaking point one rainy evening, the kind where the world outside feels as heavy as the storm inside your chest. I sat alone in my childhood bedroom, now cluttered with remnants of a life I had given so much to, my hands trembling as I clutched an old photograph of my parents and sister smiling together. The tears came suddenly, not the quiet ones that sneak up during a sad movie, but raw, guttural sobs that racked my body and made me question everything I thought I knew about family, love, and fairness. I thought of all the late nights, the sacrifices, the silent support I had given without expecting acknowledgement, and the sting of realizing it had all been invisible. In that room, the walls seemed to close in, the air thick with the weight of humiliation and betrayal. I imagined walking away, leaving the house, leaving the expectations, leaving the people who had so casually dismissed me. And for the first time, the thought didn't terrify me. It felt like a release, a lifeline dangling in a storm of despair. Flashbacks collided in my mind, moments of laughter and trust now tinged with the bitter knowledge that my devotion had been undervalued. I thought about confronting my parents. One last time, not with pleading or anger, but simply to state my truth. I mattered, whether they chose to see it or not. Yet, even imagining it left me trembling, because their casual disregard had drilled into me a fear I didn't know how to shake. The rain pattered against the window, echoing the rhythm of my racing thoughts. I finally realized that the breaking point wasn't about shouting, demanding, or making them feel guilt. It was about accepting that I could no longer anchor my worth to their approval. That night, I made a silent vow to reclaim myself, even if it meant walking alone. For the first time, I sensed a glimmer of freedom, fragile yet undeniable, emerging from the wreckage of humiliation. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, I began to reclaim pieces of myself that had been buried under years of sacrifice and unspoken expectations. I started small, taking long walks alone, immersing myself in projects that mattered to me, reconnecting with friends who reminded me of who I was outside the family shadow. Each step felt tentative, like learning to walk on uneven ground, but there was a quiet thrill in recognizing that my worth wasn't tied to anyone's approval. Flashbacks that once made me ache now served as reminders of my resilience. The late nights I spent helping my sister, the holidays I worked instead of celebrated, the countless unseen acts of care, they weren't meaningless. They had shaped me into someone capable, strong, and compassionate. I began to see my own efforts not as currency for love, but as evidence of my character, and that realization was liberating. The world, outside the confines of my family's judgment, seemed larger, more inviting, and full of possibilities I had long ignored. I laughed again, the sound raw and unfamiliar at first, but gradually more natural, filling rooms that had felt empty for too long. I pursued opportunities that were mine alone, creative projects, professional goals, small, personal victories, and each one stitched a patch of confidence back into the fabric of my identity. Most importantly, I learned to hold my own boundaries with quiet firmness, understanding that love and respect are only meaningful when they are mutual. My parents' decisions still stung, and the scar of humiliation remained, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it became a catalyst, a push to recognize my own value outside the family's narrow vision. In that process, I discovered a truth that had been waiting all along. I could stand tall, even if the people I loved most had failed to see me in the end. Closure didn't come from an apology or a grand gesture from my parents. It came from within me, quietly, steadily, like the slow turning of a key in a lock. I realized that holding on to anger and disappointment only kept me chained to a version of myself defined by their approval. Walking through the house one last time, I lingered on familiar corners and old photographs, not with bitterness, but with a calm acknowledgement of what had been and what I had endured. The past was a chapter, not a sentence. I allowed myself to grieve the family I thought I had, while simultaneously embracing the life I was ready to build on my own terms. I pursued personal goals, formed deeper friendships, and invested in passions that reflected who I truly was rather than what anyone else expected me to be. Each small victory, each moment of laughter unshadowed by comparison, reinforced a sense of self-worth that no inheritance, no favoritism could ever take away. Occasionally, memories of humiliation still surfaced, but now they served as reminders of resilience rather than pain. Standing outside, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt an unfamiliar weight lift off my chest, a quiet, steady peace. I had survived the betrayal, reclaimed my voice, and, most importantly, I had learned that my life and value are mine to define. The world beyond the family home felt wider, filled with possibilities, and I stepped into it with a strength I hadn't known I possessed. The chapter of hurt was behind me, but the story of who I was becoming was just beginning, vivid and unapologetic, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free.